Nobody in the B2B marketing world launches a campaign in the hopes that it doesn't succeed. Experience has taught us to always have a backup plan and to prepare for the unexpected. So, what do you do to turn around an underperforming marketing campaign? Welcome to this episode of the B2B Marketers on a Mission podcast, and I'm your host, Christian Klepp. Today, I'll be talking to Skip Wilson, who will be answering this question. He is the CEO at Draft Media Partners, who endeavors to help people solve their marketing problems and scale their businesses. Tune in to find out more about what this B2B marketer's mission is. Mr. Skip Wilson, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you on the show, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation because, man, we are talking about something today that is going to make some marketers feel a little bit uneasy. But man, you know what they say about growth and continuous improvement, right? You've got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and I'm oversimplifying that now, right? But
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's true in all areas of life. I feel like it's like you've got to be willing to be uncomfortable or push yourself past whatever, like past where you would normally stop, right?
That's right. All right. Well, without further ado, let's dive right in. So, Skip, you're on a mission to help marketing and advertising professionals get real predictable results and improve their business operations. So, for this conversation, let's zero in on a topic that has become part of your professional mission, and that's how to turn around an underperforming campaign. And, if we're going to be honest, like no B2B marketer wants to admit that their campaign is underperforming, but it does happen, right? So, let's kick off this conversation with two questions, and I'm happy to repeat them. Number one, what are some of the most common causes of an underperforming campaign? And number two, where do you see many B2B marketing teams struggle with campaigns?
Really, every campaign, for the most part. I mean, the dirty secret is that I think there isn't really a campaign that doesn't have room for improvement. Because always, when you go into a campaign, even if we do the research and the planning ahead of time, and we try to figure out who should be seeing the ads and what messages we should be doing, virtually everybody does a good job nowadays of like A/B testing, meaning testing different creatives or different audiences or both. But by definition, you're doing that in hopes that you find a difference between what's working and what's not working, implying that at least some part of it's not working. So I think being willing to admit that, hey, this campaign has room for improvement is critical, because I mean, of course it does. Otherwise, what are you testing? If it's going to be perfect right off the bat, there is no need for A/B testing. It would only be A testing. And so and nowadays too, I think it's just so much easier because you get such immediate feedback. It's easier to put $500 into a test campaign than it is to spend $30,000 on research, or something like you would have had to do 20 years ago. So with the idea that there really isn't a campaign that's not going to at least have some room for improvement, the main thing that you're always sort of trying to figure out is the part that is working. It's the same as like trying to fix an engine. And that's the way I think about it. As long as you're clear about what parts or pieces make up the campaign, like this part gets from here to here, and then this part gets from here to here. As long as you know what those steps are, then it becomes very easy to fix. I would say the main reason why it's such like a mystery sometimes is like, oh, which part should we fix? Or, hey, my client's not getting leads, or my client's not getting the sales that we projected. The reason why that becomes such an unfixable problem is because you haven't clearly broken out what those steps are, and then also laid in the tracking to figure out how to test each piece. It's just like, it's the same as trying to figure out if my laptop's randomly not turning on. It's like, okay, well, is power getting from the wall to the computer, and is the power getting from the computer to the monitor? It's the same process. It's like, all right, are people clicking the ad? That's the first job. If it's a digital marketing, or if it's direct mail, are people scanning the QR code? If not, then I've either reached the wrong person or I'm saying the wrong message. Breaking down the pieces, I would say, is like the first step. And I don't know, honestly, if I answered either of your questions.
You did. You definitely alluded to in your description what the causes are of potentially a campaign underperforming, right?
It is always just two things. It is if a campaign's not working, it's either that you're talking to the wrong
Right,
person or that what you're saying isn't getting them to do the thing.
right, right. So the call to action, like you haven't encouraged them to take that next step, so called, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Either you've said it in an uncompelling way or you've been unclear about it. One of the I would say that we take over this type of campaign all the time.
yeah,
Where let's say it's a financial advisor or something like that, and they run a campaign that is schedule a free consultation, and they put that out there. That seems like a good idea because that's ultimately what they want, right? They want more consultations. So it's like, okay, well, let's do an ad targeting high net worth individuals that are looking to invest, and let's tell them to schedule a free consultation. The problem is that that's not terribly compelling because if they wanted to schedule a consultation, they would have already talked to someone, right? Like that ad, if you have a big enough budget, like if you're buying a Super Bowl commercial with something like that on it, I don't know that you'd get a return on investment, but you at least would get appointments out of it because you're reaching such a massive audience. I still think it would be very inefficient, but that's okay. But if you're trying to do that with a 10 grand budget or something like
yeah.
that, you're just not going to get that many
No,
appointments
no.
because nobody woke up today going, let me talk to a financial advisor,
Nope.
right?
Nope. Certainly, certainly not. And I mean, let's just brush aside the fact that the Super Bowl ads are, you have to spend a ridiculous amount of money to even get in there, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely, absolutely. And so, just moving on to the next question. You've kind of alluded to it already, but like, what some of these key pitfalls? What are some of these key pitfalls that marketers should avoid, and what should they be doing instead?
The number one pitfall is usually poor planning, like prior to. The number of times that I get a brief of a campaign, our company usually is working, actually, about 2/3 of the time we're working behind the scenes of another ad agency. And so we get handed these briefs of what's been put together and presented of those things. And they'll usually do a great job of doing like market research, or they'll do a great job of coming up with things that are on brand as far as messaging. But the where they don't do a great job, which is good because if they did a great job of this, then my company wouldn't exist. But the where they usually fall down is the actually figuring out of, okay, what's the sequential messaging? In other words, what is that initial ad to get somebody who was not planning on talking to this business at all today to now start considering this category, getting them, so instead of saying schedule a consultation, instead it's, get up to date market trends. Well, that's something that every high net worth individual cares about. So, okay, sure, I want up to date market trends. Getting them to go from not caring at all to some sort of piece of content, usually. Not saying sign up for a newsletter. I think that's a little bit old hat. That worked great a few years ago. That doesn't. That is harder now. Not a bad thing, but harder now, especially if you don't have an audience. But trying to get them to engage with some piece of content, and then it's like, all right, well, and then now we got to get them back to the page because realistically, most of the people coming to the first time aren't going to do anything. They're going to leave. So getting them back to the page, you want to have a very clear step. Almost every campaign needs to follow that same structure of cold traffic gets them to a thing, and then you want a good follow-up strategy once they get to that thing. It's whether it's Facebook, Google, those types of things, it doesn't really matter as much. It's there's efficiencies there, but if you've structured your campaign to where it's cold audience here, then warm up that audience once they get there, you're going to have a successful campaign. Even if you could get it, if you could get a 3x campaign to a 3.6 by moving platforms, maybe, but you'll have a successful campaign no matter what you're doing.
Right, right, right. No, those are some really good points. There was something that you were mentioning earlier, and I just wanted to follow up on that. How much of the underperformance of a campaign do you feel, in your experience, is related to the team just messing around with too much tech, and the tech is not, it's not talking to one another. But more importantly, let's go a level above that. Um, to your point about poor planning, there is actually no plan in place for the technology. It's like, let's just keep piling up the tech, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So almost every platform does get better with time now. Like, so Google does get better at finding out these types of people click, these type of people don't. But because of that, the number of times that a client is told, oh, well, your underperforming campaign, it'll get better, just give it another couple of months. That's very rarely true. It is true that, like I said, you can get maybe a couple of points like difference, like a 3.4 ROAS to a 3.5. But if your campaign's just not working, it's not going to go from not working to working on its own. That's putting way too much faith in Google or Facebook or Trade Desk or any of these platforms. It's putting way too much faith in their algorithm. Their algorithms are great, but they are incredibly like that's kind of like trying to clean your house with like a toothbrush, right? Like it's great for getting those like fine corners and things, but that's not going to take an underperforming campaign to make it perform. And so I do think that there is a massive over reliance on, oh, well, Facebook optimizes within itself or Meta optimizes within itself. So just let it sit there for a little bit. That's just not true. It can take 2 or 3 months, but if it's taking that much time, you should be testing different audiences and testing different headlines. Otherwise, it's not going to just magically improve.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And you did bring it up earlier, but would you say that part of it is also just going back to the point of poor planning? Part of it is also like maybe not doing the right research. I'm gonna say, like, there's working under these internal assumptions that, like, yeah, we know what we know who the customer is, we know what the target audience is for this, so we don't need to do any more research on that because we're pretty confident we know who this is going out to.
Absolutely. Actually just yesterday,
Hmm.
it's not a brand I can mention, but unfortunately, but it is a kava brand. I'll say that, which is a new type of beverage that is like an alcohol alternative. They've had essentially no sales. So very brand new company, huge budget though. They have big backers and those things, but they came with this very thick briefing on who their customer is. With no sales data, you really have no idea who your customer is, right? Like, you can do a little bit of research on who's doing it in the market or who's buying it in the market, but the reality is that's purely a what I call a swag or a strategic wild. I'll let the A stand for itself. Guess that it's a it is, and it looks great, but ultimately, when I'm actually putting together like that campaign, I'm going to take that as like a mere suggestion more so than the hard Bible. Very different for like a company that's had 5 years of continued sales and has a strong customer base. In that case, we are building lookalike audiences. But when you've had no sales, you're just guessing. And for smaller companies, if you're a roofing company or those things, a lot of times we'll get the other end of the spectrum, which is, oh, our target audience is homeowners, right? We just care about homeowners. Well, it's really not true. You only care about homeowners of homes over 10 years old, right? Because if it's less than 10 years old, it's probably still covered by warranty. They're not going to call you, right? And so it's falls on two. There's danger on both sides of those things, but definitely you want to sort of be as strategic as you can, but you do want to work from a place of knowledge. In other words, do as little guessing as possible because guessing is bad, and but if you do know something, play around with it and think, actually, what do I know about my audience? It's not all homeowners. It's homeowners of 10 years and older that are in hail damaged zip codes. And now that's a very easy to target place that's going to get a much better ROAS than just targeting homeowners. Also being realistic about each piece of the campaign as well. That's part of why I do think it's worth always planning out. My ads get from here to here. Usually it's let's say a platform like Facebook or Google or whatever to a landing page. Being realistic on what is a landing page conversion. Those are Googleable numbers. Like 2 seconds of research, you can find out, if I'm a dentist, what should my landing page be converting at? You want to know those things because I think every marketer in the world has had those meetings where they've done a bad job of preparing the client beforehand. And then you walk into that meeting going, hey, Mr. Mrs. Client, we got you, 40 leads last month. And then they're going, that's terrible. 40 leads. We needed 200 leads. And you're going, wait a second, who told you 200 leads, right? Knowing what's realistic from a campaign is important. And it is There's no excuse for that nowadays. Nowadays, if that happens, and it does happen, sadly, still even sometimes, but it's purely because that step wasn't done at the beginning. Because you should, in today's world, know if it's a roofing company in Des Moines, here's what our cost per click should be, and if a roofing company is going to convert at 8%, or whatever. Actually, 8% I think is about right for roofing, but it doesn't matter. Those things ahead of time, then you can compare, because otherwise you end up going, okay, well, if I'm a financial planner, which has a very low click-through rate, if I'm a financial planner, it's easy to look at like a Google ad campaign and go, 1% click-through rate, that's terrible. When I Google what a AdWord click-through rate is, it should be 2 or 3, but that's not true for financial planning. Financial planning is about 1. So knowing realistically what it should be doing before you start the campaign is a critical step.
Absolutely, absolutely. And going back to your point, it's a very dangerous thing to be speculating, right? So I think in terms of what you mentioned earlier with the Google ads, like that this generalization of like, yeah, we should have a 1% click rate, right? But
Right.
that doesn't necessarily pertain to your customers like industry or their niche, right? So people have to be very, very
Exactly.
careful if they're making these kinds of assumptions, right? Okay, fantastic. Skip, I'm gonna ask you to like put on your not hat, the doctor's outfit with a stethoscope, because we're gonna do a little bit of a diagnosis here, right?
Got it.
If we're talking already about um, underperforming campaigns, walk us through how B2B marketers can effectively turn around a campaign that's not performing. And specifically, twofold. So, how can they do the right audit or analysis, and what steps do they need to take to generate better results? And let's appreciate that every industry, as you've rightfully alluded to, can be different, but generally, what do they need to do?
So I am a big fan. What I always do, I take a piece of paper, although now I use this like paperless thing, but because we're a paperless company. But quick plug there. But you take whatever it is. If you have to use regular paper, use regular paper. But you take whatever you write with and just make 3 columns. On the far left column, you write basically what the stage is, which would be usually cold traffic ads, and then whatever you're trying to get that cold traffic to or to do. And then so usually it's going to be ad, and then landing page or content, and then whatever your remarketing or content funnel is. Again, that depends a little bit. But you write that on the far left-hand side. Then on the other 2 columns, and one of them you write audience, the other one you write message. And now you just sort of judge each piece. So when I look at the ad, clicks and impressions get a bad rap now because, as they should, because too many marketers have gone into client meetings going, yeah, I'm sorry you didn't get any leads, but, boy, look at your click-through rate. However, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because click-through rate is actually a great measure of whether or not that cold traffic ad is actually getting your audience to do the thing that ad is designed to do. So, I do judge it by click-through rate. It is a simple Google search to figure out what that click-through rate should be based on that platform in that industry. That answer can vary widely, but if you're half of what it says the average is, then you know that you've either got an audience problem or a messaging problem. And so if you find out that you should be at a 2% click-through rate and you're at a 0.3, then you can circle that as one of your problems. And then you want to deep dive on, did I clearly define the audience? And did I say a message that would get that audience to do the thing I'm trying to get them to do? Let's say that it is. Let's say that it's like, okay, well, then that piece is working. We're getting people to click the ad. It's a good click-through rate. But they're just not actually filling out the form or a phone call or those things. Now you dig into that. I use Microsoft Clarity, but there's Hotjar. There's so many different tools now to be able to figure out what is actually happening once someone comes to a landing page. If you are driving to like a piece of pillar content, like a podcast episode or YouTube, those types of things, then you're looking at like viewership rates. But let's assume it's landing pages because that's going to be I think the one that applies to most people. If you're looking at it and your landing page should be converting at 5%, but it's converting at 1%, the thing I look at is time on site. Because if you're getting time on site that's like under 10 seconds, that means you're getting a lot of fake traffic, which means that you probably should consider moving platforms. That's happening a lot where you're looking at, you're going, oh, we're getting 300 people to the website, but nobody's signing up for anything. If you look on your time on site, I bet it's in the like teens, which means it's a lot of robots. And so in that case, let's not make changes to the landing page. We're going to take a step backwards and make a change to where the platform is that we're running ads. Simple ways to eliminate bot traffic. One, you can buy stuff like ClickSees and those types of things. But the other way is to make sure that you're doing things like running, taking like for Google, for example, making sure that you're running not based off of interest location, but presence. In other words, changing it from US or Canada or Australia or wherever you're trying to run your ad and changing it to where presence instead of interest is the location. Little things like that can greatly reduce the amount of bot traffic you have. But let's say worst case scenario, one of the hardest problems to fix, which is your click-through rate's good, your time on site's good, they're still just not signing up for your thing. That means that your thing stinks, your offer stinks. In that case, you probably are running something like a schedule a free consultation type ad, which just has such a low likelihood of working because that only appeals to the person that was going to call today anyway. So you want to figure out what else could we talk about? Is it let's, like I said, if it's a financial planner, or since this is B2B, we'll say, let's say it's an accountant. Instead of schedule your, booking your bookkeeping consultation today, instead of that, it's which is only going to matter to somebody who was thinking about calling a bookkeeper today anyway. Instead of that, say something like, sign up for a free bookkeeping analysis, whatever that is. And it's the same thing. You're just essentially rewording that consultation, right? It's just a lot more compelling, and I actually would get benefit from it, even if I wasn't thinking about talking to a bookkeeper. Or, does your small business need bookkeeping? Here's 10 signs, something like that. Those types of things are going to appeal to a much larger percent of the audience than the 2 or 3% of the audience that we're going to call a bookkeeper anyway. Those steps will solve most stuff. The other part of it, I would say, usually retargeting is kind of simple. If your retargeting is not working, it's probably because you don't have retargeting set up, in which case, do. Say that solves 90% of that problem.
No, man, fantastic advice. And I would say even to the bookkeeping, and I do appreciate that not all bookkeepers and accountants do this, but things to the effect of like how small businesses or how B2B businesses can save money, how they can bring, how 10 ways you can bring your taxes down, right? Like things to that
Yeah,
effect.
exactly.
Yeah. And I know accountants that, straight out of the gate say, I don't do taxes and taxes, and that's fine. Right. Like,
Sure. Exactly. It's like, but if you can figure out, okay, well, what do you do that brings value? And then what could you do that would appeal to basically everyone? Now let's just center the campaign on that. And if the answer to that is nothing, then you're going out of business anyway. You shouldn't be running ads. You should be working for someone else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. I'm going to move us on to a question, and I really hope that this never happens to anyone. Like, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy, but you know how this goes, Skip, especially the bigger the organization is, and you're running a marketing campaign and it's not performing. Then I wouldn't even say the paranoia begins, but then the micromanagement starts. The senior managers are going to want to have an update on a regular basis of how you're turning this around and how are the numbers, where are we going with this? And it's just the worst feeling I think for anyone is just to have somebody like either breathing down your neck, or B, it's that feeling of somebody standing behind you looking at your monitor 24/7, right?
For sure.
I bring all of that up to say, how should B2B marketers effectively manage expectations internally as they navigate what is going to be this challenging process of turning around an underperforming campaign?
It's always easier to do ahead of time. It's always easier. Like if in an ideal world, before you ever spent a dime, you said, here's the map and here's the journey and here's what we're thinking is going to happen. And then when it doesn't, you're able to say, okay, we projected we thought we would get a 2% click through rate here. We're getting a 1% click through rate. So we're revamping that ad. Ideally, you had that conversation beforehand. But let's say that you didn't. Let's say that you find yourself with that vice president that's just breathing down your neck and going every day, hey, what's changing. In that case, I really think that bringing people on the journey, I think that it's most scary when you don't have a roadmap. If you One of the reasons that airlines still do the safety briefing and those types of things is actually to put the consumer, the person buying a ticket, at ease as much as it is for safety actual reasons, right? Because the reality is, if you fall out of a plane at 10,000 feet, it doesn't really matter whether your seat can float or not. The reason that they're doing that is because it makes you realize, okay, there is a plan. Like if something goes bad, there's a clear protocol and plan. And really, I think that's usually what that middle management person is looking for. They're looking for, okay, this isn't working. That stinks. What is the plan? And so if you have laid out that piece of paper, I would make it look better, because now take that piece of paper, still do it like I said, but then take a second to put it on a Google document or something to make it look nice. But then you're sharing it with them of, this is what the benchmark should be for this pillar or this piece. It's not there. So we clearly see what the problem is, and we're going to keep iterating headlines or variations until we get this piece to perform the way it should. Because what I feel most of the time is so frustrating is, we've all had those situations where it's like, I don't know what the right solution here is. And that's the part that I think is the scariest thing, right? Like, to use the airplane example, if your pilot comes out and says, both engines have stopped and I don't know what to do, that's now everyone's panicked, right? But if he or she comes out and goes, both engines have stopped, but there's an airport that's 5 miles away and we're going there, everyone's fine, right? It's the not knowing or the lack of confidence that is the scariest thing and causes micromanagement half the time. So if you're able to confidently say, this is the piece that's not working, this is the part we're iterating on, that makes everyone more comfortable and hopefully gets that person off of your back.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think a lot of it also calls for some uh, crisis management skills, right? It's I think it's with to your point, in the marketer's interest to have that, not just a plan, but also that conversation ahead of time. Like, look, this is what we're anticipating. This is what we're forecasting. This is where it could potentially go. Um, for lack of a better description, simulating scenarios. And if
Yeah.
scenario A happens, that's the backup. If scenario B happens, that's the backup. And also being able to communicate, like, hey, listen, um, this is the challenge that we're having right now, and this is what we're doing about it. Um, option 1, 2, 3, right? So we're recommending option 2. What are your thoughts, right? As opposed to like what you're
Exactly.
saying, like the pilot coming out saying, like, hey, guess what? Both engines stopped working. No
Yeah.
solution. Full
Does
stop.
anybody have any ideas?
And
It's,
yeah,
it's like,
yeah. Well,
now that pilot might be in tears when they close that door, right? But you
yeah,
at least want them, when they're talking to everyone, to sound like they know what they're doing, right? But
absolutely, absolutely. All right, my friend, we get to the point in the conversation where we're talking about actionable tips, and you've given us plenty already. But let's just assume there's a B2B marketer out there that's listening to this interview. And I certainly hope not, but they might be going through something that is that kind of sounds like their campaign could potentially be underperforming. I'm trying to put it as delicately as I can here, but like, what are like in terms of everything that you've said right now? What are like 3 to 5 things you would advise them to do immediately after listening to this interview?
First thing is recognize that advertising is a science. So unlike organic content and things, which is very much has a place in the marketing world, paid ads is an objective science. So one, know that there are clear, regular benchmarks that each piece should be hitting, or it is objectively not working. So I think that takes care of the emotions of it, right? There's no emotions in this. It's either, oh, this is working and we just didn't properly set expectations ahead of time, or no, this isn't working. Because there are often times where a campaign feels like it's underperforming, but it's actually just that, the client was expecting a $20 cost per lead, and that's completely insane for that industry or something like that. So one, you want to know, what is my scorecard and how is this campaign performing against that? That's step one, is to truly objectify the campaign. It is a scientific thing. The second, or quantify, I should say. The second piece is to then figure out exactly which piece of it's not working. Like I said, take that piece of paper, split it into 3 columns, go through. And then the third piece is to be willing to admit. I think as marketers, a lot of times we don't want to be the ones to say to the client, uh, hey, we're noticing that this isn't working. We're kind of just hoping that they don't notice. But I think that's a disservice, and I think you can always gain a lot of respect, and it's just a better way to do business to be the first one to go, hey, Mr. Mrs. Client, this is the part that's not working, and we're working on it, and we've got a plan to fix it. But I get that you're probably frustrated, and just know that we are working on it, and we know what we're doing. Otherwise, what happens is you just sort of hope the client doesn't mention results, and you just kind of hope that they aren't watching, but they always are watching. They're just, if they're not having that conversation with you, you've got 2 clients, right? You've got the client that's breathing down your neck always. The other client is the one that secretly is unhappy and just not telling you. And neither of those are a good scenario for a business, right? Like you want both of those folks to be, brought into the conversation and talked to and managed.
Absolutely, absolutely. Some great advice there, and yeah, I mean, it as difficult as it is, I think as marketers and as agencies, marketing agencies, it's our responsibility to help the client. And if we're doing something that's not working, I always feel it's better to come clean now than wait until the volcano erupts, and then you say,
Right.
"Oh, yeah, that's on us," right? Because
Right.
it's
Exactly.
not just about the trust, it's about their investment as well, right? And the time and the effort and the commitment and all of these, because you know this better than I do. A campaign, there are so many moving parts in this ecosystem, right?
Exactly. And there are plenty of times where we've gone to a client and said, this isn't working.
Yep.
Let's even pause things. I don't know that it can work for you. The number of times that we've done that and then gotten referrals, or that client come back having fixed whatever problem there was in, operationally. I mean, that happens, that happens a ton. I mean, there's nothing that gets more respect than being willing to be upfront and honest with the client. It's just a better way to live, better way to do business. And
Absolutely. Okay, sir. Get up on your soapbox. What is a what is a status quo in your area of expertise that you passionately disagree with, and why?
I think that one of the most damaging things that's about to come out, like one of the things that I think if you go to a conference right now that you're going to hear and that is about to be espoused and preached everywhere, is the reemergence of the importance of branding. Now, I love branding campaigns as an advertising agency because they're easy and they're great. And we have a few campaigns that are like government contracts where the goal is awareness. Those campaigns are great, right? Because they take a few minutes to plan and it's all profit. But the reality is, I really don't think that's a good move in today's world. I disagree with the idea that it's not that branding is unimportant. Branding is important, But the easiest and best way to brand is actually with customer experience. Like Apple's a good example of that. Their branding is in their packaging and their stores and their customer service. The idea of advertising brand is that's not a great way for a vast majority of businesses, unless you're publicly traded. It's not a great way to truly spend your advertising dollars. But it's about to be espoused. The reason it's being espoused is because with the collapse of the cookie and the collapse of the lower level types of tracking that most advertisers have come to rely on, it becomes very difficult to track return on ad spend unless you're at that sort of mid to higher level of sophistication. And so because of that, everyone's talking about branding. And I really don't think that's a good idea.
Being a branding guy myself, I do.
Sorry.
I can totally understand where you're coming from, and
ad dollars.
Yes,
it's don't put ad dollars towards branding.
Yes,
branding important, branding good.
Absolutely. But I think, and this may have been your point as well. People don't also quite understand what goes into branding, and that in itself opens the door to things like what you were saying. Let's just go through this very expensive branding exercise, and they don't actually quite understand what that's supposed to accomplish. Right? I'm like you. I'm all for branding, but there's a time and a place for it. And branding, expensive branding campaigns are not going to fix your product. They're not going to fix a bad customer experience. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you're, in the B2B space, if you're an accountant or something, unless you're one of the big four, unless you're Deloitte or Ernst & Young, why would you try to fight in the branding world?
No.
My accountant is an older guy that lives down the street from me, right? Like I'm not working with him because of his brand. And I think that's true of most, I'm working with him because of the customer service. Now, I do think that branding is important, even in that space of like we have in our office, we've got our logo everywhere.
Oh, there you go.
Branding's important.
There you go.
But I'm not going to put ad dollars behind it because nobody ultimately cares who we are. Well, I mean, we're a white label service. So actually, 2/3 of our clients don't actually know that we exist.
Right.
So,
right. Absolutely.
It's so yeah, it is branding's important mostly for your current customers, I think, for most businesses.
Exactly. Okay. Here comes the bonus question. So I have it on good authority that you, at a young age, started looking for writing work because you were trying to impress a girl. And now I'm not going to ask you what you wrote her, okay? That's for your and her eyes only. But what I will ask you, Skip, is this: if you were to look back on what it was that you wrote her, what copywriting advice would you give your younger self?
So I have the nerdiest answer to that question ever. I'm very much a systems guy. I was even then.
Mm-hmm.
So I had in my sort of sights on this person who now is my wife. And I actually did a lot of research that I came up with prior to that. I came up with what I call the GRAPE method, which is goal, research, put together an action plan, and then execute. And I literally did a bunch of research on what types of things to say. I even had like our earlier conversations, like sort of like scripted out of like what kinds of questions to ask on the phone. This is back when people still talk on the phone, and those types of things.
Yeah.
So that I did research on like what a first date should be like. And so all of those communications early on were, they weren't quite scripted, but they were definitely formulaic in terms of I wanted to make sure that I ask a few softball questions and then deep question and just things like that. So putting together, figuring out what you're trying to accomplish, then reading a bunch of books. Back then you had to go to the library to read books, but but then doing your research on that topic, how other people that have achieved that goal, put together an action plan and then execute it. That's how I wrote the stuff I wrote to her, and that's still more or less how I do things.
Well, hey,
it works.
It looks like it worked, man.
That's right, exactly. I've got a 100% close rate of
yeah.
So
Fantastic. It's such a great story, though. It's such a great story. um, yeah,
She's gotten used to my ways, right? Like some folks would hear that story, and some folks hear it and think it's romantic. Others think it's the opposite of that. She sees the romance in it.
good.
But
And that's what matters, right? That's what matters.
that's right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
fantastic. Skip, this has been such a great conversation. Thanks so much for your time and for sharing your expertise and experience with the listeners. Quick intro to yourself and how folks out there can get in touch with you.
Yeah. So Skip Wilson with Draft Advertising Technology, I guess technically full name, but the reach out to me, skip at draftadvertising.com or info at draft advertising, either of those. And look forward to talking.
Gotcha. Fantastic. Fantastic. Once again, Skip, thanks so much for your time. Take care, stay safe, and talk to you soon.
Sounds great. Thank you.